Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Under the Banner of Heaven. A great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, this seems like this is going to be kind of one of those slow burn crime drama shows. It is based off, inspired by a novel, it's a true crime novel, so it's based off of like real events, which this whole situation I know next to nothing about. I went into this show thinking that I knew it involved a detective solving a crime. I thought it was going to be cult related, but it's specifically Mormon related, which I thought was fascinating. I didn't know that was where it was going with that, but I think certain elements of this episode, you can see the cult-like mentality of someone skewing religion their way. And I think that ends up being a really interesting thing. We get introduced to our main detective, that's Jeb, played by Andrew Garfield, and he's investigating a murder. It is a mother and her child are murdered, and it seems, well, luckily they don't show us the gruesome details. Maybe it benefits that this was on FX/Hulu, because if this was on HBO, because HBO kind of like, the most recent thing I can think of is The Outsider. That showed you some of the brutality of all that stuff, so I was wondering if this, maybe, like, you see stuff, but it's just, like, they don't show the baby at all. They show Brenda's body, but it's, like, behind Jeb, and it's out of focus. But you see, like, a large pool of blood. So whatever it was pretty damn disgusting, but it turns out what it was, we get the details from Bill later on, that there was a telephone wire wrapped around her throat until it's like her throat was sliced. I'm curious, is it like, oh, it's tied around her throat so deep that it literally cut into her throat? Because it also turns out the son, the 15-month-old had their head severed. You're like, Jesus. And it's not something that this town has ever really had to deal with, because one of the cops who found the scene, he was like, because Jeb is like, hey, I want you to take, you and someone else, I need you to take photos. He's like, no, I don't think I could go back into, he's like, pull it together for their sake. So they're questioning Alan, who seems like the number one suspect, which Alan, I was looking at Alan, I was like, why does that actor seem so familiar? I think I know what I recognize him from. I believe he was in the show The Beast Must Die. So it makes the interactions between him and Andrew Garfield really interesting, both British actors putting on American accents. But at least I assume that actor's British and, European at the very least. It's an interesting way they went about telling the story. Obviously, at first he's just kind of a little confused. And then, like, the moment he starts talking about, like, right, the rest of his family, he's worried because, like, right, whoever came after my wife and son, they might be after the rest of my family. It's like, okay, where are they at? He's like, I don't know. It's like, that's where you don't know. It's like, oh, my brother's moved away. I'm like, and you don't have an current address for him? Like, what's up with that? But we get into it a little bit more, because it turns out that they are part of a well-known Mormon family in town. Like, they're kind of like the well-loved and pillars of the community, the Laffertys. And so he was a part of that family, and it seems like he eventually fell out of religion. Like, and I think that's going to be an important thing going forward in this, that he recognizes how people have done evil in the world in the name of religion. Because he references one thing where it's like, right, they basically murdered everyone in this particular situation. It's happened in time and time again in history, where people have used religion to be the reasoning behind their crusades. Literally, with the Crusades and stuff. If I'm not getting that wrong with my world history knowledge is garbage at best. So I might be misspeaking in certain regards. Also, like, I am not well versed in the Mormon religion, so I will be speaking from pure ignorance. So do forgive me. The only things I know about Mormons is just a little bit I've picked up here and there over the years, but it is once again still something I am very ignorant about. That's why I was even surprised when they're like, oh, Jeb is a Mormon. I was like, oh, really? I mean, and it makes sense because they're in Utah. Like Utah there is a big Mormon community in Utah. Like I would go as far as saying like it's the number one place for Mormonism, if I'm not mistaken. But also, I should also note, there's so many damn recognizable actors in this. Holy crap, like every time I'm turning around, I'm like, oh, I didn't know you were going to be this. Oh. So, like, there's Sam Worthington, he's one of the Laffertys. Freaking Wyatt Russell's one of the Laffertys, which is interesting when you connect the Andrew Garfield situation. You got Spider-Man and Captain America. Yes, I know, but it's just like, it's interesting. It's like, oh, it's funny like how stuff like that works out sometimes. You got one of the Culkins in this, Rory Culkin. One of the actors who, Jeb's wife is played by, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's the actress who played Tawny in the show, God, what is it? Rectify? I want to say it's her. Her hair's a little bit longer, so I think that's what's throwing me, because as Tawny, to my recollection, it's been a while. I think her hair was a little shorter as Tawny, so I think that's kind of messing with me a little bit, but I believe it's the same actress. And there's also Christopher Heyerdahl. I'm like, dude, every time I'm turning around, because that dude is always working, because every time I'm turning around, I'm finding out he's in something. I feel like I might, because the only thing I've ever seen was the teaser trailer for this. I don't think I even saw the trailer. So, I think I remembered that he was in it, because I think he's pretty, like, you can see him in the teaser trailer. But, I mean, it's like back-to-back stuff. He was technically in the final season of Van Helsing, because he was in, they were using footage. Then he was in Chapelwaite. Then before this, he was in Peacemaker, and now this is like, man, back-to-back stuff. The dude's always working. Every time you turn around, you'll find him in something, which I think is kind of interesting with, like, recent projects, and now to be in this situation is like, oh, like, to play the character that he's playing, just because they start kind of bringing up, at least Jeff starts suggesting, like, oh, maybe there's some Satanism involved in this, because he's trying to justify being like, oh, maybe there's another angle for the reason why this is all going down, that suggesting that Alan might have actually started with the rest of his family because he was on the outskirts, because he had walked away from the LDS, which my immediate brain was like, when I was like, what is LDS? I was like, Latter-day Saints? So a real quick Google search, it seems like I was right, because that's what immediately popped up in my head. I was like, the initials LDS seemed like that was the only, because they never actually say it throughout the show, but I guess it also makes sense, because, like, right, when you're more, like, why would you ever say the long form of that? What, because this is their community, so it's like, right, like, amongst it, we know LDS, like, we don't need to spell it out. So I guess that's also interesting, because, like, right, why would you be like, oh, you Latter-day people from the church, because also it's used in the form of, like, a noun, because usually it's in the form of the Church of Latter-day Saints, but now it's like, oh, just referring to people who are part of this as LDS. Like, that's just kind of like using it as kind of almost like a pronoun. I don't know if it ever gets used as a pronoun. I only know it in the confines of the Church of Latter-day Saints in that capacity. So, once again, like I said, I'm going to be talking from ignorance in a lot of parts, but the fact is, Alan walked away from this, and his family, because there's a lot of religious pressure from that family, because that family is such a religious, that family has such a high standing in the community amongst the Mormon religion, and well, amongst the LDS. So of course he's like, right, the pressure eventually got to Alan. Alan killed his siblings, and then he saved his wife and daughter for last, trying to say it was a situation of, maybe it's one of those things of like, right, I committed this crime and I want to get caught. He says that he didn't do it, but as he's talking with Jeb, because Jeb knows them, because obviously he's part of all of this. In fact, he's going to church with, like, the Laffertys and stuff too. So it puts him in, I think, this very complicated position, because I think all of it is going to make him, I think the point of it is to kind of come to, like, maybe he'll start questioning his own religion, because it's like a thing of like, you speak in such certainties, and I think that's such a fascinating thing, where Alan, who has kind of lost his religion, kind of like, how can you speak in such certainties? Because the complicated thing is, his wife Brenda, it's like, right, Brenda was very, like, devout and religious person, but she was still too free-spirited, because he was like, amongst Mormons, the wives are meant to be obedient and kind of serve the husband. And it's kind of like Brenda didn't fall into the sort of roles that it seems like the Mormon religion might allocate women to. Once again, this is my understanding of the show. I'm not trying to apply anything that may or may not be true about, the Mormon religion life. I'm just like, once again, speaking from ignorance. But based on what Alan was making it sound like, it's like, right, she didn't fit the more, I think you're supposed to be a little more meekish and not speak unless, like, the man is the higher authority in the family, and as a job as the wife is, I guess, supposed to serve, I guess. So she didn't fit that role, and I think that was so interesting where Alan was like, right, did she deserve what she got, what happened to my baby? And Jeb was like, no, they didn't. And he was like, then you may not be the good Mormon that you think you are. I was like, oh shit. Because I interpret that, and maybe I misread that. I read that as him saying like, oh, like a good Mormon would be like, no, they deserved it because they were, I don't know if heretics would be the right term in this regard, but they were blasphemous in a certain regard. That's how I interpreted what Alan said, but I think that's also his point of like, right, when you get into the hardcore angles of religion, like people will go as far as saying like, right, you kind of deserve this because you kind of brought it upon yourself, not because Brenda thought of herself as a very religious person because she came from a religious family, as we saw as she spent time with her siblings and the little we got with her siblings and her dad and everything. That she came from that type of background, but the moment she came here and, when she eventually met Alan, he introduced her to the family. He's like, right, the less you say, the better. And she's almost like, wait, what? Because and she makes a joke and makes a reference of like, she just talked very out of pocket, at least from their perspective. She's a very, like, religious, kind girl, but she was very kind of opinionated and kind of did her own thing. Like when they're picking up those rocks later on, you notice where all the women are. Like, this is our role. We're here to help and serve. In this regard, the men are the ones supposed to do the heavy lifting. She went out and helped. But you guys didn't seem to have issue with. The people who did, though, were some of the women and their Papa Lafferty didn't look too kindly upon that. It just, because it's interesting because Alan puts the perspective of the entire family had their eyes on Brenda, and Brenda also had her eyes on them. Because apparently he was like, yo, there was like flirtation between some of my siblings and her. One of the ones she latched onto, I think, was Dan, played by Wyatt Russell. So that's interesting. Did I call him Captain America before now? I think I did. Oh, how blasphemous of me. I mean, twofold. For one, Steve Rogers was my Captain America. My Captain America now is Sam. So I'm like, so I think I referred to him as Captain America. I think I meant to say U.S. agent. Regardless, tangents and all that aside, I just thought about that just now. Regardless. That's also a lot to kind of get thrown at you at once. But I guess it's like, right, like Mormon families would be that big. And it's just like all those tables, all those people kind of getting thrown at you at once. But Brenda kind of took it in stride. Was like, oh, I know this, and this. One of the wives was like, oh, what was it, Matilda? She kind of references like, oh, yeah, like me and so-and-so. I had children by someone else, but we got divorced. But they were also like, that person was a Christian, so it's not that big of a deal about the divorce. So it kind of all worked out in the end. But she also references like one of the siblings and Matilda had a thing, but then eventually they went off and met. I want to say it's Sam Worthington's character, I believe. His wife, like, there was a complicated triangle situation going on there. It's like, that's just a lot to kind of get thrown at you with the family dynamic and such. And I like how they make things complicated both in and outside of the case. Because this is kind of a complicated family situation, which a family under their circumstances of being LDS, but also being in a strong community of LDS, and Brenda's role in that and everything, the complications in her and Alan's relationship, because Brenda's dad was under the impression that he said that Alan beat Brenda, and he said, like, we got into a fight once and I regret that, because it seemed like, he's like, from the beginning they never kept secrets from each other, but then things started to shift and change, because he blames himself, because he's like, I led her to the den of wolves. I led her to my family, and she got so indoctrinated, she was all about it. As he was falling further and further away from it, she was tilting further and further into it. Which seems so interesting considering, like, but I guess it's like, right, once you kind of get brought into it, but it's like she was kind of like this outsider that didn't fit the mold in certain regards. In some regards, she did. Obviously, the way the family latched onto her, but their dad, not quite as much. But other elements of the reason why I think it's so interesting is because we also have the perspective of someone like, God, I was about to call Bill by his last name, but we'll just call him Bill because I couldn't remember Bill's last name. That actor, I was like, why do I recognize him? And I was like, I've seen him before, and I guess the thing I know him from is Banshee, because I was looking at his filmography, and I was like, I don't think I know anything you've been in. I think the actor's name was like Gil. I've seen him in stuff, and I'm like, but none of the stuff in his filmography, I was like, the only thing I could be aware of was like Banshee, and apparently he was in 5 episodes of it. And I was like, I don't remember. It's been a while since I've seen Banshee. But regardless, Bill's kind of an outsider to all of this himself, because he's actually from, well, at least as an officer, as a detective, he was in Vegas. So his lens is going to be interesting to view this case through. Him and Jeb, because it's going to be an interesting dynamic of Jeb having the eyes of an LDS, but maybe he's going to have to turn away from that a little bit because he's a little too close to it, a little too close to this family when it comes to this investigation. So Bill has to be that outside perspective on things. But Bill ain't afraid to also put it at like it is, too. He's like, I do recognize that I am a darker skin complexion than 99% of the people in this town. And Jeb was almost kind of being like, no, it's not even like that, you know? Because Jeb was like, yo, know your place. He's like, I get it. I'm darker than anyone else. And Jeb was like, no, it's not even like that. Don't make it a race thing. Doesn't say those exact words, but him being like, no, was almost kind of like, basically like, don't make this a race thing. Because I thought it was because I kept wondering, like, why didn't... Well, he made it pretty clear early on, because Jeb was like, I wanted to hold off telling Brenda's dad about it, about what happened to her, because he wanted to get the rest of the family gathered together, at least the siblings, so that he has all the questions he needs to ask, because he wanted to make this as easy as possible for Brenda's dad, because he's like, I don't want to call her twice. I want to call her dad twice, because I'm already going to have to break this news to him, and I want to do it all at once. I want to rip the Band-Aid off, rapid fire everything I need to ask, and leave him alone until I actually have answers. That was his way of trying to get peace, but it's like, right, Bill's like, you've never actually investigated a murder before, because they've been handling the investigation, they've been following his flow of an investigation, Jeb's, and not the more typical homicide detective approach to this case. So I even thought it was interesting too, like, after all Alan's been saying over the course of the episode, Bill walked in on Jeb praying, because it was almost like a right in a time when he's lost and, you know, got a lot, you know, on his mind and trying to find answers and be pointed in the right direction. He's praying, and I think it's just interesting that he's praying at a point like after Alan is kind of ripping into the LDS and kind of talking about its history and just kind of like how there's no good in it, that he wishes he could go back to a time where he believed that God was love, but he doesn't feel that way anymore. But Bill's also trying to come at this from like, right, don't complicate things, because now, like, Jeb is trying to make it seem like there might be more to the case, especially with like the missing siblings and everything, and ultimately they do run, like, having put out like a bolo for the people in beards that Alan claims that he's seen, plus the families and such, they ultimately end up finding one of the siblings. It's Robin at the end of the episode. So, and Bill ends up saying, like, right, go look after your family, because the Laffertys have ties to your family. They know who they are. So just to make sure they're not in any danger, because we don't really know what this fully is. So we did see, like, while Bill was at the crime scene and such, that someone is, like, in a red vehicle, like it was like a van, it might have been like more like a truck or whatever, did kind of stop nearby the motel and was like across the street. So Bill's looking at direction, but I don't know if he fully recognized, like, okay, what's that about? Because it does seem like he's kind of like maybe the drunk on the team too, kind of a separate note, but it's like throughout the episode he's constantly popping gum to kind of, I think, freshen his breath, or or it might be a combination of to cover his breath because he's drinking or smoking or something like that, or maybe it's kind of like an oral fixation type of thing. But I also like the perspective that Jeb has at the end of the episode, because the entire conversation has always been like, oh, could this be someone that's an outsider that's doing all this? But once again, Jeb is the one who brought up the conversation about maybe making it seem like it might be like something satanic related of the craziness of it all. So coming at that from the perspective of Alan, who walked away from his family, but he's also saying, like, right, what if we've been so focused on believing, like, right, this is some crazy person from the outside, but what if this is basically just the first edge of the bone that is sticking up from the desert land or something? Essentially saying, what if the beast has always been here? What if his view of, the LDS, his point of view on this religion, like, he's kind of been he's too close to it, so he's been blinded by what it is, and he has never really seen it for what it actually is, or at least not paying attention to the fact is of what the wrong mindset and what justifications people can use religion to, well, justify. So I don't know, I just thought that was just kind of an interesting thing. Like I said, it definitely feels like this show is going to be that slow burn of a show. I feel like a lot of like detective stories, crime drama stories of like this like feel and vibe definitely have that slow burn approach to them, I think. There were 2 episodes dropped. I don't know if they're going to do that the entire way. I'm wondering, is that going to be like the new thing? Because like Outer Range on Prime Video is also doing like the 2 episodes a week thing. Plus, like, well, it's not the same thing, but like Netflix had a show called Bugaso that would drop an episode Saturday and Sunday for like 8 weeks straight. They did 2 episodes a week. So I'm wondering, like, is that the new thing? Because usually most things are, at least like HBO Max and stuff, drops 3 episodes. Same thing for Prime Video, I think, on week-to-week stuff, except for the Outer Range thing. But regardless, I'm curious to see, is it going to just be a 1 episode a week thing, or is it going to be, maybe just because of the nature of what the show is, it's like, pacing-wise, it's better to put both episodes out just because it's a little cleaner that way, rather than leaving it where I don't know. I'd be interested to see, because I actually don't know how long this is. I do believe it's a miniseries, so it's not like a multi-season thing. So it's a one and done. So it's going. I don't know how many episodes it's going to be in totality, but I'm excited to watch episode 2. Like I said, it's already out, so I haven't watched that yet. I've only watched episode 1, but I'm going to make time to squeeze in episode 2 with all the other reviews whenever I eventually get to them and everything. But I'm excited to see. Well, I say excited with the nature of the story, but I'm really interested, I guess would be a better word to say, to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.